Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Africa 360. I'm Lindy Mtongana, standing in for Kwanguluwewe. It's an uphill battle for women trying to make it to the top of the corporate ladder, not least of all here in Africa. But one such star is South Africa's Phuti Mahanyele. This week on Africa 360, we sit down with the young and inspiring Chief Executive Officer of the Shanduka Group, one of the largest African-owned and African-managed investment holding firms. Let's take a look at Phuti's journey from the township of Soweto to being named the Forbes Woman Africa 2014 Businesswoman of the Year. 1970s Soweto. A place of defiance and resistance. And it was here, at the height of the anti-apartheid movement, that Phuti Mahanyele was born. The child of hard-working and respected black businessman Professor Phuti Mahanyele, Phuti was raised to cherish the value of education. And it is her parents' tireless efforts in the face of a racist government that Phuti credits for her success. She completed her BA in economics in the USA, followed by an MBA in the United Kingdom. Young, wise and worldly, she was a perfect match for New York investment firm Fieldstone, a company she dedicated 7 years to, eventually earning the title of Vice President. Upon her return to South Africa, it was the Development Bank of South Africa that snapped her up. But it wasn't long before she caught the attention of current South African Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa. The anti-apartheid trade unionist turned mega businessman saw her potential and appointed her the head of the Shanduka Energy Division. When Ramaphosa prepared to return to politics as South Africa's Deputy President, Phuti was an obvious replacement. At the helm of the Shanduka Group, Phuti manages the firm's multi-million-dollar investments, including their 70% shareholding in McDonald's SA and Coca-Cola South Africa. Shanduka is also invested in energy, financial services, telecoms, mining and property in South Africa, Mozambique, Mauritius, Ghana and Nigeria. And for Phuti, the accolades continue to roll in. She was named a Global Young Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2007. In 2008, the Wall Street Journal counted her among the top 50 women in the world to watch. And Forbes named her one of the 20 youngest power women in Africa in 2011. A precursor to the Forbes Woman Africa 2014 Businesswoman of the Year award. At just 43, it's clear that this bright star is still rising. Phuti, thank you so much for joining us in conversation today on Africa 360.
Sure.
Let's start at the beginning. You were born in Soweto in the 1970s.
Sure.
A time that many might describe as the height of the resistance movement against apartheid here in our country. Now, perhaps just give us an idea of what your experience was like growing up in South Africa at that difficult and tumultuous time.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. The 1970s was a very difficult time in South Africa, as we all know. And what I think certainly has always inspired me is that my parents always sought to make sure that they could provide the best that they could for themselves, but also for us. You know, in the 70s, we were we moved around. First we lived in Soweto, then we moved to Claremont in Durban, and then in 76 we were moved to Lesotho. And then we came back to South Africa again in 77 and, went and lived in Soweto. And then in the early 80s, we moved to Sandton and, started to go to school at Macaulay House and, you know, and all of that. So it was a time of change. We were always moving around.
And then you went to the United States for your bachelor degree.
Yes.
You must have been quite young at that stage, your late teens.
Yeah.
What was that like as a South African, being a foreigner in the United States?
Yeah, so I was 17 when I moved to the States, having just completed matric. It was strange. I remember when I got there, I had this, this thinking that, okay, these are black people, so because I'm black, these are the people that I can spend time with. And so I remember when I got on campus, I immediately sought the black students that, they would surely be more friendlier than everybody else. And the experience was, it really taught me a lot. I learned then that it was not so much about race, but all of a sudden I realized that just being black was not enough, It was the fact that I was from Africa, whereas they were born in America, and they viewed me as different.
And of course, I mean, this is a time in which you leave the United States working in New York for Fieldstone.
Yeah.
And I suppose you lured back into coming back home to South Africa. What was the motivation behind that decision?
It was a wonderful time working for Fieldstone. And when they had an opportunity where they opened up an office in South Africa, I then moved to South Africa and I worked on a number of transactions here. And then I decided that I needed to get a different working environment, and that's when I moved from Fieldstone.
I suppose that's where Shanduka comes in, and Cyril Ramaphosa poaching you really, or really targeting you to be a member of this particular company. Yeah. And what has Shanduka been like for you? I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa is someone that, was quite celebrated for his business achievements, and he was something of a mentor for you. What leadership lessons have you learned from him?
Yeah. So I've been at Shanduka now for just over 10 years, and one of the things that I've learned from the Deputy President is just his humility. It was always amazing for me to see how we were in this environment, many of us young people, very hungry, we wanted to we had great dreams of things that, appeared very unachievable. But he had this manner of being able to engage with us like he was one of us, like he was just a young person as well, and it was wonderful to be able to work with someone like that who was such a great person, but what also had so much humility within him. And the other thing that I learned from him as well was the importance of just really, really focusing on your role and just doing as much as you can to push that to the very best endeavors that you possibly can. And he worked very hard. And it really was a huge privilege to be able to work with someone like that, who was so humble, so hardworking, and just, showed so many good attributes. If you walk here at Shanduka, you walk around, everybody will be able to share something with you about the Deputy President. From the time from the gate to going upstairs, everybody has got a story because he valued everyone, And if he saw someone that he didn't recognize, he would stop them and he would say, "Hi, who are you?" So it was really a huge privilege to be able to work with him.
All right, well, let's leave it there for now. We will be back after the break. Our conversation with the Forbes Africa Businesswoman of the Year, Phuti Mahanyele, continues.
When you look at the public sector, you see that we have a number of women in senior positions. Why is it that we cannot have it in the private sector?
Welcome back to Africa 360. Let's continue our conversation with Phuti Mahanyele. Now, Phuti, you, of course, received the Forbes Africa Businesswoman of the Year award last year. And Africa as a continent is associated with a sort of conservative type of patriarchy. So in your experience, what has it been like charting through through business, really, as a black woman in Africa?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy, but the reality is that it's not easy for anyone in any part of the continent. There are many challenges, as we know, because we're still in a process of developing infrastructure in many countries around the African continent. But notwithstanding that, there are huge opportunities.
Do you think, though, that women have to sort of, jump over various hurdles before they can take the benefit of some of these opportunities you speak of?
It is tough, and I think it's not something that a woman will experience just on the African continent. It's anywhere in the world. It's the same experience, And what I've seen is that we have very tough women who are working very hard to make sure that they position themselves for the opportunities that are there. And I've had the opportunity of coming across a number of women who've been able to succeed on the African continent despite the challenges that we see. So, I think the issue of, the challenges that we as women face is something that is international. But, on the African continent, I think there's still some tremendous opportunities there for us, and I think you will see more of the emergence of women. It wasn't just recently when they announced that the richest black woman in the world is now on the African continent, in Nigeria, in the oil industry. But, I see a lot of opportunities for women, and I think that whilst visibly it may not appear that way, there's certainly a certain capacity of women who are there and will emerge as time moves on.
Now, in South Africa, certainly, the face of big business when it comes to boardrooms is still predominantly white and still predominantly male. How does the issue of race affect you in your experience when you look at corporate South Africa?
That is still a significant problem. And it's something that I know, obviously we see a lot of efforts from government, and there's efforts also from the private sector, but more needs to be done to be able to have more young people being involved in the private sector or in business or, other spheres.
And now what about black economic empowerment? I mean, it's come under a lot of criticism, with people saying, Pravin Gordhan, our former finance minister, saying that BEE policies have not worked and they've not made South Africa fairer or more prosperous. And in fact, education might be a better thing to focus on in terms of one of those real barriers to moving people out of poverty rather than BEE. What are your thoughts?
I think that sometimes we do tend to be overly critical of the whole legislation of black economic empowerment without taking into account the fact that at the end of the day, notwithstanding whatever policy you may introduce, there will be those who will be successful, and then there will be others who will not be successful. And so in BEE, you've had entrepreneurs who have been able to be successful, but you've also had entrepreneurs who have not. And I think we do tend to be too harshly critical of black economic empowerment.
And when you look at corporate culture in South Africa, I want us to wonder whether or not it's the corporate culture at fault or whether it's the individuals. And I'm speaking specifically of black women and the opportunities you mentioned earlier. Are we not seizing those opportunities, or are there certain things that are stopping us from being able to attain them?
In South Africa, it's not so much of women not seizing the opportunities. It's also the opportunities being made available to women genuinely, and unfortunately, particularly on the private sector side, that continues to be a problem, where, there are still biases, particularly against black women, and that is why you don't see the prevalence of senior black women in corporate South Africa, and so, we need to relook at the attitudes of leaders of business, in South Africa. It's just a matter of women who are talented and who are capable being afforded the opportunities and being in environments where it is possible for them to be able to continue to engage and to do business in a successful manner. Because, you know, a workplace is also, it's an environment where you are with people, it's a community. And if the culture is not conducive towards attracting, keeping, and then, you know, also promoting, you know, women who are able to succeed in certain areas, then, you know, clearly there's something that needs to be looked at there. And so I think that this is something that one still sees as being very prevalent in the private sector in South Africa. And I say in the private sector because when you look at the public sector, you see that we have a number of women in senior positions. Why is it that we cannot have it in the private sector? You know, so, you know, this is something that needs to be dealt with. And, you know, it's an issue and a question to corporate South Africa. Why are you not willing to change? Change in line with the consumers, the users of your product. Because when you look at the consumers of the products of these large corporates, it's, you know, families who are influenced by women. And most of the families in South Africa are black families. And so if you're not going to be doing, you know, running your business in line with the consumers of your product, then what are you saying? So, you know, it really is a significant problem, and it's something that needs to be dealt with in the private sector.
And now, speaking of family, I mean, between all your busy schedules and all the things that you're committed to, do you find time to you know, enjoy a social life with family and friends? Yeah,
I do. I just, you know, over the years, I think I haven't been very good, clearly.
Are you married, by the way, children?
No, I've been divorced, but twice. So I haven't been good in that department, but it's something that I continue to work on.
Practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back after the break. Do stay with us. Our conversation with Phuti Mahanyele continues in a short while.
There is still so much promise for the African continent. We just cannot give up. We need to continue to remain committed to see the results of the work that we're doing today.
Welcome back to Africa 360. This week, we're talking to Phuti Mahanyele, the Forbes Africa Businesswoman of the Year. Now, Shanduka also does invest on the continent in various countries. And, you know, from your experience traveling around Africa, do you believe the phrase, Africa is rising?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It really is. And I think we will still see, you know, it really is rising, and we will still see that emergence still coming through. You know, the reality is that this is such a large continent that you absolutely cannot expect to be able to see that emergence all happening immediately. But you know, we will see. As you hear of, you know, the big entrepreneurs that are beginning to emerge. I mean, 10 years ago, no one knew of these entrepreneurs, you know. But today we have a number of large private sector entrepreneurs that are known on the African continent, and they themselves are running large businesses. And so we will see these changes happening. It will become a lot more visible as time goes on.
But what about your investor confidence? I mean, surely certain aspects of political instability, perhaps those driven by, you know, terror threats from Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, etc., may shake your confidence somewhat?
I don't think so. I think that the reality is that, you know, if you look at a country like as large as Nigeria, there will always be some form of a challenge. But, you know, at the same time, the opportunities exist. That does not drive it away. It is a challenge, but the opportunities are still there, because you've still got hundreds of millions of people who are dependent on being able to have access to food products, to various products that they need to be able to survive, and somebody's supplying that, you know. And so, you know, the opportunities for growth are there. We just have to continue to focus on that, and we can't move backwards.
Yeah. But I mean, speaking of Nigeria specifically, I mean, Shanduka does have a big interest in what happens there, huge stake in MTN Nigeria. Surely it is of a concern for you what happens in that country politically in dealing with terror threats and other such challenges, political challenges.
No, sure, no, absolutely. That's very important. And, one is, obviously always hopeful that these issues will be dealt with accordingly. And yeah, we just remain, resolute.
And looking at 2015 and I suppose the investment opportunities that may open up in the year, where would you say are the attractive places right now for those looking to make investments or looking for growth on the continent? Where should we be looking? Where should we be keeping our eye?
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult time because you see challenges in many countries in different forms. But the reality is that the opportunities are there. If you look at a country like Zambia, today they going through their political changes, but the opportunities are there. It's a small country, but it's a country that has had a significant amount of stability, and so the opportunities are there in a country such as that. One just has to remain alert and resolute to the opportunities. The issue is that I think you look at the particular product or whatever industry it is that you're focused on, and you begin to invest in it. And, over time, it's not a one-day game. It takes a number of years, and, and you'll begin to see the returns of the work that you are doing. But you have to be in it for the long haul.
If you had a magic wand and you could fix just one problem on the continent that you believe would have a positive ripple effect on other problematic issues in Africa, what would that be?
There is something that immediately comes to mind, but I've got to think about, but I'll say it. It would be on the quality of leadership. That we have voters who can have the courage to vote for the right leaders to rule the various countries on the African continent. Because when you look at many of the challenges that we see around the continent, I think if you had leaders with the right teams around them, they could be approached differently. So I hope I'm not being too negative, but I'm just being simply honest.
Now, you said you do believe that Africa really is rising.
Absolutely.
But tell me, what would you say inspires you most about the continent?
The people. Yeah, the people. That in spite of the challenges that we see around us, people remain resolute. I went and I gave a talk at Harvard University a few years ago, and I was speaking to students who are from Nigeria there, and they were talking about longing to go back home. Now, these are students who could go and work anywhere in the world, but they are talking about, for them, the importance of going back home, So, that's why I tell you that there is still so much promise for the African continent. We just cannot give up. We need to continue to remain committed to see the results of the work that we're doing today.
It's beautiful. You are an inspiration. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Africa 360. If you'd like to add your voice to the discussion on the issues raised, do visit our Facebook page or tweet us at A360_ENCA. You can also send your emails to africa360@enca.com. Thanks for watching and goodbye.